Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the A segment of episode 8 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation the Fly. We begin this segment with a fly flying outside, but eventually heading towards the Kids Next Door Sector V treehouse. As a heads up, I should also mention that this segment features no dialogue, and there's no sound except for music throughout this segment. Reactions from characters are based off of body language, such as facial expressions, hand gestures, and mouth movements. So continuing on, the fly lands on the roof of one of the parts of the Sector V treehouse, but then the roof opens up because a vehicle is landing in this particular part of the treehouse, and the fly actually follows the vehicle inside before the roof closes up. The Sector V operatives emerge from the vehicle. It looks like they've completed another mission, and this mission involved a samurai helmet because they now have a samurai helmet with them as they exit the vehicle. Number 1 is planning to put the samurai helmet on a pedestal under a glass container, while number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5 return to their respective rooms. But after his teammates have entered their respective rooms, number 1 actually takes the samurai helmet with him into his room, and the Sector V leader is unaware of the fact that the fly has followed him into his room. In his room, number 1 wears the samurai helmet, and he takes a ruler and pretends that the ruler is a sword. So he's essentially pretending he's a samurai right now. Eventually, though, number 1 notices the fly, and he's quite fearful of the fly. He keeps trying to get away from the fly, but the fly is persistent in following him. Eventually, though, number 1 resorts to activating a very powerful fan. How powerful is this fan, you may be wondering? Powerful enough where number 1 has to hold on to something that's bolted to the floor in order to keep himself from flying all over his room. So yes, number 1 activates this very powerful fan in order to get rid of the fly, and the fly ends up going through one of the vents. Eventually, the fly ends up on the other side of the vent, which takes it to number 2's room, and number 2 is sitting at his desk, and he has inventor's block right now. He can't seem to figure out any ideas for any new inventions right now. But when the fly lands on number 2's desk, he's suddenly inspired. He's quite fascinated by this fly, and the fly seems to be his muse for his latest invention. He brings the fly to what seems to be a scanner machine, and the scanner machine prints up some papers with details that seem to satisfy number 2. Soon enough, we see that number 2's latest invention is a flying device inspired by the fly. It's not a jetpack because it has flapping wings, and it comes with a pair of goggles that resemble the fly's eyes. So number 2 is flying around his room with the fly. Presumably, he's mimicking the fly's movements to continue to perfect his latest device. Eventually, though, the fly goes through another vent system. The fly goes through the vents again, a different set of vents, and number 2 ends up crashing into the wall because he didn't catch that the fly went through the vents until it's too late. So, through this system of vents, the fly ends up in number 3's room and notices that number 3 is having a tea party with her stuffed animals. Like number 2, number 3 is fascinated by the fly when she sees it, and she actually tries to catch the fly in a net. Although the fly manages to evade number 3 for a while, number 3 does eventually catch the fly, and she dresses the fly up for the tea party. So, number 3 wanted the fly to take part in her tea party. And when number 3 has her attention elsewhere for a moment, the fly attempts to fly away. Number 3, though, is determined to try and catch the fly with her net yet again. But the fly manages to go through the vents, a different set of vents, before number 3 has the chance to catch the fly yet again. This system of vents leads the fly to number 4's room, and number 4's immediate reaction upon seeing the fly is to squash the fly. So number 4 attempts to squash the fly, but the fly keeps evading number 4. And eventually the fly escapes through yet another system of vents. But this doesn't stop number 4. Oh no, number 4 actually goes through this system of vents to get the fly and squash the fly. Eventually, this system of vents leads the fly to number 5's room, and the fly lands on number 5's hat. She's wearing a pair of headphones right now and reading a magazine, so number 5 is unaware of the fly on her hat right now. But she is aware of number 4 when he gets stuck in the vents. Number 4's face is visible now in number 5's room, but his legs are still stuck in the vents right now. Number 5 glares at number 4 for going through the vents, but number 4 points out the fly on her hat and how he wants to squash the fly. So number 5 now is aware of the fly's existence, so she takes the fly out of her hat, and now she's just holding the fly between two of her fingers. And number 3 arrives wanting to bring the fly back to her tea party, and number 2 arrives wanting the fly so that he can continue to perfect his latest invention. Number 1 stays at the doorway to number 5's room, and he just wants the fly out of the treehouse, and he's still pretty nervous around the fly. Number 5 paces back and forth, wondering what to do, but she eventually comes to a decision. She opens up her window and lets the fly out of the treehouse. Number 1 is relieved that the fly is gone now. Number 2 and number 3 are sad about this, and number 4 is angry because letting the fly go isn't the same as squashing the fly. So the fly is back outside now, and the fly actually enters the mansion of the delightful children from down the lane through the chimney, and then we find out that the fly was actually a spy robot. The spy robot fly attaches a cord to an outlet, and now computer screens are filled up with video footage that the fly spy robot recorded while it was at Sector V's treehouse. The delightful children watch these recordings, and they give out a laugh that we, the audience, can't hear, and as they're watching these videos, and that's how we end this segment. So this segment is notable for being the first art segment of the series. Tom Warburton actually mentions these type of segments on one of his blog posts, although he refers to them as art episodes, but given the way that this channel defines segments versus episodes, we'll be calling them art segments on this channel. But essentially, Tom Warburton explained that he and Mo Willems was, I suppose you could say he was the head writer or the co-head writer alongside Tom Warburton himself for the first 4 seasons of Codename Kids Next Door. Because notably, at least for the first 4 seasons, Mo Willems is consistently credited in the credits as one of the writers for a particular segment. Tom Warburton had wrote all of the segments for episode 1, and he wrote all the episode 1 segments. Tom Warburton wrote all the episode 1 segments by himself, but Mo Willems had been part of the series since episode 2 up to season 4, and there were a couple of other writers for a few segments here or there, but for the first 4 seasons, Tom Warburton and Mo Willems were consistently the co-writers of most of the segments for those first 4 seasons. But I digress. So anyway, Tom Warburton explained that he and Mo Willems liked the idea of occasionally writing a segment that was different from the standard narrative type of story. And so that's where these art segments came from. They have something different than the standard narrative. So, and although Tom Warburton said their intent was to do one per season, and there are 6 art segments in total, one or the same number of segments as there are seasons. They actually aren't once per season because 2 of the art segments are actually in season 4, and season 5 doesn't feature any art segments whatsoever. So, yeah, not quite once per season, but almost. But anyway, for the first art segment, the Operation The Fly, they wanted to do a segment with no dialogue and no sound effects. The only sound that you would hear in the segment is music. And so you would just have to rely on the music and the mime and miming to see what the characters were doing, or what the characters were feeling, or what they were more or less saying, I guess you could say, for the course of the segment. And Tom Warburton gives the storyboard artists and the composers a lot of credit for the job they did with this particular segment. And I have to agree with Tom Warburton. They did a great job with presenting us with a segment with no dialogue and no sound except for music. And I did notice each of the Sector V operatives had their own themes that played. So I do think that was a good idea to kind of help compose themes that reflected each of the Sector V operatives. And I do think, yeah, they did a great job presenting us with a segment with no dialogue. And Tom Warburton also said that he's glad that Cartoon Network gave them the go-ahead to create this type of segment, because according to Tom Warburton, most executives don't like to have those type of stories, especially in the first season. So Tom Warburton was especially grateful that Cartoon Network allowed this type of segment in this early on in the series. And otherwise, yeah, I thought this was a pretty cool segment because without the dialogue, you really had to pay attention to the visuals and the music to see what the characters were feeling. And it stands out to me in particular because I generally do like to pay attention to facial expressions, and I myself also I also know what it's like to communicate with hand gestures. Like, some of you might have seen that in some previous videos. Like, there are moments where I might use hand gestures, and yeah, like, I'm someone who sometimes communicates with hand gestures, so I can appreciate having a segment that focuses mostly on hand gestures or facial expressions to get across what characters are thinking, feeling, or I guess you could say saying without actually hearing what they're saying. And yeah, that was that's right. Now that I'm thinking about it, this segment more clearly shows number 2 as the inventor of Sector V, because like it was hinted at before, or they kind of gave some hints here or there earlier on in season 1, but they never came outright and said it. And well, they didn't outright say it here because there was no dialogue in the segment, but the visuals made it very clear that yes, number 2 is the inventor of Sector V, or as a later segment reveals, his formal title is the 2x4 Technology Officer of Sector V. So that was pretty cool. We did get to learn a little bit more about, well, not just number 2, the Sector V operatives in general. We got to learn a little bit more about them by visiting their respective rooms and seeing what they were doing on their spare time before the Fly's presence was known to each of them. And yeah, they all had different reactions to the Fly. So again, the fact that they were able to tell us a lot about Sector V's operatives without actual dialogue telling us was very impressive. So I have to give a lot of credit to this segment. Like, it definitely stood out to me back when I was a kid when I first watched this segment, and now that I'm older, going back and seeing this segment, I can definitely appreciate a lot of what this segment was getting at. So all in all, I would say this was a first great art segment for the series, and it will be interesting to revisit the other art segments of the series with a slightly different perspective now after the series has ended. So otherwise, there we go for now. So as of this video, we've now discussed the A segment of episode 8 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.